there. Today I'm going to do a how-to on making a simple bracelet. We have a clasp and a couple of jump rings, some crimps and crimp covers, and some line. This line is called beading wire, but it's actually a very fine cable with a vinyl coating on it. I think it's vinyl anyway, some kind of plastic coating, and some beads. It's helpful to have some flat nose pliers. 2 pairs is really handy, although your old-fashioned garden variety needle nose pliers out of the hardware tool chest will probably work. I made a bunch of my first jewelry with needle nose, and some cutters will be helpful. Proceeding, I'm going to make a 7.5-inch bracelet. This is a strand that I got on sale, probably at Michael's or Joan's, someplace like that. And so it's got beads and then the metal accent beads. And so I'm just going to make it up just like this for a 7.5-inch bracelet. Now my clasp, and the crimp bead will probably take up about 1.5 inches, 1.25 inches. So I'm going to measure out 6 inches of beads. Okay, so that's good right there. And so I'll snip this at one end, and a smart thing to do is to secure one end of your line either with a clip if you have one, paper clip, not a paper clip, a clothespin will do. This will do. Or you can go ahead and secure it to the first end of your clasp. How that works is you put on your crimp bead. I usually like to add a buffer bead, and then you could put your line right through the hole in the end of the clasp, and then put your line back through your buffer bead and your crimp bead, and pull that little tail. You want to leave about 1.5 inches or 2 inches of tail there. You're going to pull your beads up over that, because if your tail is really short, if something should happen and your crimp is loose enough for a hard pull to pull that loose, then there goes all your work. So unless you have a special crimping plier like that. So we're gonna just go with the straight nose. So get hold of your crimp bead and push your buffer bead right up to the edge. You want to give yourself enough room to, you don't want this to be so tight that it can't move at all, but you don't want it to be so loose that it's too floppy. So pull it up there, and let's see if we're in frame here. Okay, and just squeeze that crimp bead flat there, like so. See if that worked. Yep, just squeeze it flat like so. And if you want to try to use your crimp covers, you can. They're awful fiddly. How I do that is I get hold of them between my fingers like this and slip that crimp in. And then wrap that line around my finger. And then ever so carefully, careful, because you can smash these beads. Ever so carefully close it up. You don't have to use those crimp covers if you don't want to, though. They're real fiddly to try to use. But if you want to try to use it, that's how. So that secures one end of our line. And now we'll just bead on about 6 1/4 inches of beads. And if they're, if you're stringing them on straight from another strand, that's pretty easy. You can just usually just put your line in the bead hole and pull them off like so. Snug those lines up together and move the beads from one line to the other. These beads that come on strands at the craft store, that's a temporary strand. I wouldn't try to make a bracelet out of that. It would be too easy to break. So now we're just beading the beads onto the line. There. See, now that we're coming back to the other end, you can string those beads up over that tail, you see, and that helps keep it tidy and tucks it in neatly like so. Remember that your clasp is going to add some length to your project, and to adjust the length of your beading according to that. Okay, we're doing great. Now I'm going to get the end of my line. I actually had cut a really long piece of this beading wire for another project, but it will make a nice bracelet too. I think, okay, yep, I need about another inch of beads. All right, now I'm going to put my crimp bead on and a buffer bead for the other end, and we're going to go through here. Now this might be a little bit tricky. You've got your jump ring on there, and your line needs to come around the jump ring and back through your buffer and crimp beads. So back through here and back through your crimp bead, and again you want 1.5 or 2 inches of tail there going back through your beads, about like so. That should be enough. And then as you pull your line up, like so, wise to hold on to that right there. Make sure you've got hold of that line, because it's going to want to let go. It's going to want to get loose. Hold on to it there so it doesn't get loose on you. And then take your flat nose or your needle nose right in there and smash that crimp bead. When I'm using a flat nose or needle nose, I like to crimp it from both sides, see, so that it's flat now. It was a tube and now it's flat. And again, we're going to attempt that crimp cover. This is optional. You certainly don't have to do this if you don't want to. And then lay that crimp inside there. And again, I usually like to hold on to it at one end and lay the strand over my finger, and then ever so carefully close that crimp cover. So then you take your cutters and you get as close into that line as you possibly can and give it a snip. And there you go. Voila. Good job.